Hello again, this is A.J. Wildman. This presentation reviews the potential outcomes of the November 2nd congressional election and the formation of a viable independent third national party. I desire to have a conversation with my fellow citizens that are really ready for change. That means citizen, neighborhood, small business, and environmentally friendly change in domestic and foreign policy. It is already mid-November, and this one-sided conversation needs to quickly become tens of millions of discussions among yourselves in the final weeks leading up to the election, and far more of a debate across the nation leading up to the 2012 presidential election. While one must always leave room for some humor in these when discussing such tedious issues, we do have a society to maintain, an entire economy to restructure, and a global environment to save, or frankly, none of this is really going to make a damn bit of difference anyway. Therefore, for the minority among us that like things the way they are, and for the growing majority that do not, I declare that this is not just business. This national confrontation is about as personal as things can get, and that means personal times 305 million of our citizens. Now let's consider the three possible outcomes of the election in light of the challenge made in the Declaration of Civil Responsibility. That is to vote out all 435 members of the House of Representatives and 34 of 100 U.S. senators that are up for election that day. And frankly, the outcomes are good, bad, or ugly. First, the ugly. Let's say this electoral challenge arrives too late for the election and does not reach adequate public awareness. Or it does and the voters ignore the challenge. You know, as Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart just don't pick up on this and help me get the word out. If that is the actual scenario, the electorate will be doing exactly what the Democratic and Republican Party leadership want us to do, just as we all have always done. Some incumbents in both parties will lose their seats as the public's frustration is vented upon them. And then there will be probably, from the polls that are out so far, there could be a shift in majority control in one or both houses. In either case, the parties will both continue to make the same routine speeches they do after the election, and then they'll all go back to doing the same usual things and not really working for us. Further, the corporate lobbyists will still be running the place. And the only difference being that they could be writing the big checks to different members of Congress. Our opportunity will have been missed, and we will have to focus really on the 2012 election. Next, the not so bad. This is where the awareness and acceptance of the challenge is partially accepted, and 40, maybe even 70% voted their incumbent out of office. But still, obviously, not all the voters could actually part with their regular incumbent losers. Even this partially successful outcome would be historic news on election night. It would shake up Washington and would serve as a severe warning to both traditional parties. Further, it would show real grassroots support for a third-party movement. The surprised new members of the House and Senate would be very anxious to please the American electorate that gave them a chance to serve the people to their surprise, okay? Rather than taking the traditional bow to the senior party members of Congress, they will be looking to us for some direction. Then the good. Should enough of the frustrated electorate fully accept the Declaration challenge and make true history on that day, the suddenly lame duck members of Congress would personally know what shock and awe really meant. Then, from that point on until the 469 men and women were sworn into office in January, the stunned Congress will really need to be watched closely to make sure they and their lobbyists do not push through any late-minute goodies, which they will certainly and absolutely try to do. On that great election night of citizen victory, the nation will share in a historic celebration with congratulations due all around. Our electoral revolution will have been accomplished, and the spirit of American democracy will have been renewed. Further, the new 469 members of Congress will realize that the nation has spoken to them. They will no longer be ignored, we will no longer be ignored by Congress. And they will be waiting for our instructions and the instructions we will have to give them. Some perspectives on the some other perspectives on the 11-2 vote. In 2008, the frustrated electorate uh, wanted change to happen. That was the big thing. And we went out and we voted for change leadership in the form of the person, President Barack Obama. And I personally do not care what your feelings are about him as our president or the job he has done so far, because he is our president and we need to work with him. The point is that we were electing someone that at least wanted to change, wanted to make change happen. And as opposed to a senior member of the congressional leadership, as in the person of John McCain, that has been in Congress since 1986. And the problem and then as the last 2 years have evolved, we have grimly observed the usual gridlock in Congress. Okay, it's just like we had in a football frame of reference. We basically brought in a potential star quarterback and stuck him with a losing offense and defense. And now I'm wondering what the problem is and who's to blame. On Tuesday, November 2nd, we need to go out now and then draft an entirely new team, offense and defense, and then put those new players on 24 hours notice or 24 months notice that they need to live up to our expectations or they will be replaced, and possibly the president as well. Now let's talk about the independent party and an American agenda. The vast majority of American citizens would acknowledge that the two-party system that we have is broken, at least when it comes to caring about our common good. Therefore, we need a politically viable alternative, and fast. So here it is, folks. As they say, everything in its own time. Regardless of the voting outcome on November 2nd, in order for the grassroots movement to get going in the right direction, there are two primary things that need to be delivered starting early in 2011. The first is the formation of a national independent party that is fully sworn to protect and serve the common good of our citizens with a vengeance and with no games. The second is an initial political platform that actually solves several of our national problems and is acceptable to at least 60% of our citizens. And you'll notice I keep talking about our citizens because that's who's really important. My fellow Americans, we will create an independent party and with a publicly viable platform comprised of actual solutions that have already, as I've said before, have already been developed and are documented in an American agenda in the book, The Second Coming of Common Sense. To the first requirement, in the months after the election, a new independent party will be formed. Some names are being considered, and that will be published after the election. In fact, third parties have not really, as you know, have not really done very well in America, and then some of them are still in action today. Most of them have been well-intended independent movements, but they have not been successful, partly because the two parties do everything they possibly can to discourage and crush independent candidates, let alone the new independent party. Also, too often they're just a shade off of being another Democratic Party or another Republican Party, and so they fade. And often also, they only have one or two issues that they're really focused on, and the public just really can't be impressed with them. This independent party will quickly become the nemesis, day-to-day public nemesis of the other two parties, and aggressively work to build a political movement running up to the 2012 election. Politically correct will be replaced with plain truth and common sense in domestic and foreign policy. Now, with regard to the second requirement, simply stated, what is needed at this juncture in domestic and foreign policy is a platform that is devoid of biased party politics and free from the veto of self-serving special interests, and that they take the form of both individuals and industries. A common vision and strategy that the American public can agree to, embrace, and demand to see enacted starting in 2011. To that end, the American Agenda's 27 proposals and supporting concepts were developed, and with 700 pages of detail to back it up. All that documentation is freely available on the internet for the public, the press, and even the two parties to review. The agenda should be thought of as legislation that will actually fix many of our problems, It will reverse legislative sins of the past and will help rebuild our economic system from its current depression status. In this campaign season, more groups are pushing to dump the incumbents than ever, and this set of offering needs to gain the public's attention, as well as the attention of the 469 challenger campaign teams. So please pass this on quickly. In the end, each of us that is capable of voting on November 2nd is challenged to get up that morning, make your way to the local polling place, and boldly cast your vote against the incumbent members of Congress. We must go to the polls with fire in our eyes and vengeance in our hearts. On November 2nd, the American electorate will indeed, one way or another, decide who will rule this country starting in January of 2011. And the only acceptable victor must be we, the citizens of America. And with that, I say may God continue to bless you and your family. Good night. I think that's a good